Representative. I love this one. Son of Oregon Tuskegee Airman Flaps Berry, this Executive VP of Information Technology and the Chief Information Officer at Bonneville Power Administration, as well as Honorary Commander with the 142nd Fighter Wing of the Oregon National Guard, CEO of Airship Technologies, and a long-term supporter of the Spirit of 45, community leader, and my good friend, Ben Berry.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and it's actually very good to be back with the Spirit of 45. And it's my honor and my pleasure to be with you speaking about the Battle of World War II, the Tuskegee Airmen, and my father, in particular, Tuskegee Airman Ben Flaps Berry. In 1944, early in 1944, America was losing about 40 to 50 B-17 aircraft bombers every day. We carry about 10 air crew on those bombers, so 500 to 600 air crew were being killed or captured every day. And so America needed to know if they could have more pilots. And they wondered if black people could fly airplanes. Because nobody had ever seen a black person flying an airplane. They weren't allowed to fly airplanes and didn't have access to airplanes. So the call went out, and some 10,000 African Americans raised their hand, and they became enlisted in the Army Air Corps to be trained to be pilots and air maintenance crew. And so they trained them in all kinds of classes, mental tests, physical dexterity tests, all kinds of tests. And they looked at the ability to take rapid action classes, so things like aviation, aeroflight dynamics, mathematics. So think about mathematics. One class in algebra, you had to take the entire class, read the entire book, attend the classes, curriculum, and at the end of 1 week, you had to have a final examination. And if you didn't pass within 95% of a score, you got washed out. Several things like that in many of the courses. And then came, if you got past the test and the course material, then you got into flight training. And they were using the old Curtiss P-40 Warhawks. Those aircraft were in the Indochina war effort, working on the behalf of the Chinese as they were being invaded by Japan. They used to have the little shark teeth in the front of those airplanes. You might remember what that looks like. The old war hawks. Kind of slow, but still got the job done. If you got past that training, you would think you would be able to go into the war front, right? Wrong. You got through the normal training for the air pilots, but the generals didn't want to put them in the war effort. They didn't think they would be good against the German Luftwaffe. And so they just kept training and training and training. And they became the best trained pilots in the U.S. Army Air Corps. So one day, Eleanor Roosevelt came out to see the Tuskegee Airmen. And she got on a plane with one crew. And she flew around. And she landed. The press were there. And she got off the plane and she said, look, these are good pilots. Let them in the war effort. And so that's what they ended up doing. First let them in North Africa. They said, okay, we want you guys to scrape the enemy on the ground, take out the trucks, take out the trains, but don't go up against the Luftwaffe. You're not good enough for that. But one day, there were 5 Tuskegee Airmen who were flying these slower P-40 Warhawk aircraft. They came up against 5 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, the top fighter aircraft in the German Air Force. And they took them all out. They took out the 5 German aircraft. And the generals took note of that. And a few days later, there were 2 Tuskegee Airmen who were flying off the coast, and they came up against a German destroyer ship. And these 2 Tuskegee Airmen, just using the machine guns on their aircrafts, this P-40 aircraft, began to scrape the destroyer. They hit the ammunition depot wanting to destroy it, and the ship blew up. So America said, wait a minute, these guys might be a little bit better than we think they are, because we're still losing these B-17 aircraft over Nazi Germany. They turned to Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, and they said, Colonel, do you think if we bring you into the European theater, you'll be able to protect our bombers, our B-17 bombers? And Colonel Benjamin O. Davis said, yes, but we're going to need the top of the line aircraft the U.S. was now producing, the P-51 Mustang. And so they left North Africa, they got into the European theater, and the new planes started showing up. And these planes were shiny, they were aluminum shiny airplanes. All of a sudden, the generals wanted to let's put camouflage on those planes. And the Tuskegee Airmen who were having none of that. They said, no. We want these planes to be seen by the enemy. We want to have the shiny aluminum shine, and we want to paint the tails red. Some of you may have seen the movie Red Tails. Well, that's where that came from. And so when the Tuskegee Airmen started flying a bomber escort over into Germany with our bombers, the German aircraft, the Luftwaffe, saw these shiny planes. They said, what in the world? There's no camouflage on those planes. And when they came in to attack the bombers, the Tuskegee Airmen went to work. And they destroyed practically all the Luftwaffe as they would attack these bombers, these American bombers. And the American bombers said, well, who are these guys? We want those guys. They didn't know they were black pilots. Eventually they did. But they kept calling, but we want the red tails to come in and protect us. And so they didn't lose a B-17 bomber to Luftwaffe aircraft. They got shot down. The bombers got shot down from ground shrapnel being shot at them. But that was part of the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. And so after that, 2 weeks before my father, Ben Flaps Berry, he was a cadet in the Tuskegee Airmen. He was due to graduate. And there was a bomb that had gone off over a city called Hiroshima. And it was called an atomic bomb. Destroyed the whole city. And it was dropped by a plane called a B-29 bomber, U.S., and nobody had ever heard of that either, because both were developed in secrecy. And when they asked the Japanese to surrender, much like Germany had surrendered in May of 45, this was August 6, 1945, that they had actually destroyed Hiroshima. The Japanese said, well, one plane and one bomb can't destroy one city. We don't believe it. And so 3 days later, August 9th, America dropped another atomic bomb on Nagasaki, destroying the whole military city. After that, the Japanese said, okay, you've got a secret weapon. We're going to sue for peace. So the war was winding down, and within that 2-week period, they were asking the Tuskegee Airmen, who were now in the Bomber Command, preparing to actually invade Japan. So my father in the Bomber Command was flying a B-25B Mitchell bomber to fly off aircraft carriers, much like they had done with Jimmy Doolittle in April of 42. But because the war was winding down, they said, okay, we're going to now move the Army Air Corps into the U.S. Air Force. We don't know what that's going to look like, what the time commitment's going to be. Many of the Tuskegee Airmen, they were the cream of the crop because they had gone from 10,000 down to just 1,000, and the 1,000 became the Tuskegee Airmen, plus including their maintenance crews. Many of them wanted to go back to college and wanted to create their careers. My dad went back eventually to California, Los Angeles, and he ran into Howard Hughes. And Howard Hughes encouraged him to seek an engineering degree at USC. And so he ended up going through aeronautical engineering. He became the very first African American to graduate in aeronautical engineering at USC, which allowed him to work in the aerospace industry. So it's been my pleasure to tell that story to you today. and to give you a glimpse into what African Americans were doing then, even though they weren't really accepted during the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. America didn't celebrate African Americans. Our history wasn't told until more recent times. And you see things like the Red Tails movie coming out. Even my dad didn't tell us he was a Tuskegee Airman when I was growing up. I had to find that out by watching one of the Tuskegee area movies. When I came home, Dad came home and said, I said, Dad, there were black pilots in the Air Force during the war. They were called the Tuskegee Airmen. And he said, well, yes, and I was one of them. So that's how I